Now, there's no doubt that today's topic is an important one. Over the last year, we've seen a decline in FAFSA completions and college applications. And this raises early warning signs and severe implications for both the educational attainment and racial wealth gap. But while colleges in the U.S. are serving high shares of white and Asian students, Black and Hispanic students are disproportionately enrolled in open access, less selective, and for-profit colleges. And that's why we're excited to announce the beta launch of our new FAFSA course designed to help you understand the FAFSA application process. And you can learn more by registering for free at my.inversant.org and signing up for our free FAFSA course. Now, on to our panel of experts that are joining us today to discuss racial equity in higher education and the role FAFSA plays in bridging that gap. So today you're going to meet Zenia Henderson. She is the Director of Member and Partner Engagement at the National College Attainment Network. She's working in closing equity gaps in post-secondary attainment for all students. Hey, Zenia, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. We're really excited to be able to represent our NCAN members today. Thank you.
Next, we have Erika Reyes, the Associate Director of MetroWest College Planning Collaborative. And she provides outreach, training, mentoring, and advising to youth and non-traditional adult learners in the MetroWest region. Hey, Erika, thank you for joining us.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here and represent the CPC.
And we have Stacey Kostell, the Chief Executive Officer for the Coalition for College, which is a group of more than 150 top colleges and universities working to make college affordable, online and offline, no doubt, and able to ensure students graduate on time with no or low debt. This is an important part of our mission. Stacey, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And I'm excited to be here and represent the 150 colleges and universities that are part of the Coalition for College.
All right. Well, again, thank you everybody for joining us, taking that time. And thank you to everyone who is joining us live. We're going to take your questions in real time. So don't forget to drop them into the comment section as we go. All right. Are you ready? Let's jump right in. So the college application season is underway for high school students of 2021. And already we see warning signs about the pandemic's effect. One of those is FAFSA applications with a 13% decline. I'd like to open the discussion with what can we learn from this decline and what do we see its intention or, its particular implications, especially when it comes to low-income students. I will throw it out there. Whoever wants to jump first, go for it.
Well, I will say, as the coalition, one of the things that's important and as part of our mission is just that, making sure that college is affordable and also accessible to families. And so, as the coalition is actually a member of NCAN, and we have really appreciated the FAFSA tracker. And one of the things that we've really done is use that FAFSA information to really guide the types of conversations and things we should be having and what this means. Because, as a former enrollment manager myself, you can certainly look at your own data and see what's happening on your own campus. But I think as a member of the coalition, we're also what's just as important to us is how students are doing nationally. And if more students, underrepresented students, limited income students are also going to all colleges and universities, but certainly coalition colleges and universities. And so it's really helpful to know what we need to be doing. And I think that when we saw the FAFSA completion being down so much, it was really a call to action in lots of ways for us to rethink what our program was going to be for the year. And that's certainly what we did.
It does seem like a call to action, and I'm curious, Erika, what kind of call to action did you interpret from that decline? And as we're looking at the changes that were happening, what kind of changes did you encounter, and how did you address that?
Well, the completion rates, they show us that the pandemic is disproportionately affecting the rate at which low income and minority students are completing the FAFSA and enrolling in college. So this means for us at the CPC, we have to triple our resources around FAFSA coaching and around summer melt prevention. We're in the process right now of applying for an NCAN grant. So we're able to have more manpower to, target this problem of summer melt. And the pandemic has turned the lives upside down of our students that are most underserved and vulnerable and it could have long-term impacts on them without us taking intervention as soon as possible.
That's interesting that you talk about summer melt. Did you see an increased melt last year in the beginning of the pandemic, and are you anticipating increased melt this year?
We did. We did see an increase last summer, and we're anticipating a similar thing. Our students have, told us that they're thinking about, taking a gap year or working more hours and taking less classes. So it's definitely on our minds, and we're thinking that's going to be another issue too for these incoming freshmen. So we're trying to prevent that.
And Zenia, what kind of an impact has it had on your organization and the people that you work with?
Yeah, so I'm fortunate to, first of all, be here with some of our NCAN members and you all, of course, who very much are representative of, the pivots that our NCAN members have made over the past year. I think what the numbers did startle everyone, but didn't really surprise us, right? Because we already know that FAFSA completion, enrollment overall, and so much more, the numbers are already not good for our students of color, our low-income students, our first generation college students. And so while not surprising, I guess, maybe still just shocking, right, at the number, the dip that we saw. And so what we have seen that our NCAN members are doing are really pivoting and meeting students where they are and families where they are in terms of still being able to get them the education, the access to resources and tools and the service. I mean, just the pure help, right, to be able to complete a FAFSA. Families need, very specific guidance. They have very particular situations where, it's not just, hey, here's the link and fill out this form. And so that's really where we've seen our members excel.
And that's heartening. That's heartening to hear, especially, and I'm thinking too about, Erika, what you just said about, both about summer melt, but the questions that you're hearing about people taking a gap year or taking a year off and needing to earn more money. And what does that pause? I mean, of course, that also plays into the decline that we're seeing in the application process, but how is that affecting, if we look down the road, re-entering, the college, process is also another barrier for people to continue to complete. And that has a lot to do with equity and access as well. How are you seeing that, this initial decline playing out over some time with those declines or with those gap years or with the time off? And how is each one of your organizations looking at that potential? Let me start with you, Erika, because you mentioned it first.
Yeah. Well, for us, we stay in touch with our students. So even if they're taking a, gap semester, they're still in touch with us. We have a plan of, when we're doing the next FAFSA, when we're looking at classes, when we're looking at orientation or anything that they need to do to enter college or re-enter. So for us, it's just constantly, keeping that conversation going with them and having a plan in action. Yeah, I think that's what we focus on, is just keeping the student engaged, even if they're not in school, because that's the hard part, is just getting back. But if they have a point person, someone they can go to that they know they can go with their questions, they're going to be able to do it and come back.
Thank you. And then Stacey, how do you see that longer term implication coming into play?
Yeah, I think, the deferred question got a lot of media coverage at the beginning as, students are taking, they may have been admitted, but decided to defer for a semester and then many of them for a year. I think for the member schools, the good news is you, if they applied and are admitted and they told you they were deferring, you have the group of students, as Erika mentioned, to keep that relationship with, to make sure that they're going to continue their education and doing what they need to do to enter into school the next year, including making sure you're providing them affordable financial aid to attend. I think the bigger concern is the students who we don't know about. They didn't apply to college at all. I think that there was some assumptions made that we would see community college possibly go up. Like students would, they have to be virtual, they'll just stay at the community college. And most community colleges didn't see that happen. And so I think it's how do we connect with those students who would love to see at our colleges and universities that didn't go last year and didn't start a community college, And one way is really working with our partners at community-based organizations who may know these students and say, we still want you to attend. You don't have to come right out of high school. You know, you can be just as successful or more successful by waiting a year or two to attend.
And those are important messages. And before Zenia, I turn to you, I wanted just to interject. We had an interesting comment come in from David, where he talked about people losing trust in the current atmosphere of the pandemic and not necessarily seeing that value of higher education. And is that playing into those pauses in the education process? Zenia, how has it affected you?
Yeah, so I do think that we are hearing a lot about, questioning the validity of education. And, and then you see sort of the kind of commentary from, maybe wealthier students or families who, aren't going to pay what Harvard or Stanford or whatever, Ivy League schools are worth because they're not getting that experience. And so, then you're kind of left with like, well, are you paying for the education, the degree, or are you paying for the experience of what, the on-campus, life experience brings. So I do think that there absolutely people are questioning the value of higher education. But I think, as a national organization who believes that, a post-secondary plan, pursuing a college or degree or skill that will help the student pursue a viable career is really where it's at. And so, this notion of gap year is one that we're really looking to figure out how to change. Gap year is usually seen as something like I'm going to go travel Europe for a year, which is not the case for our students. When we are talking about underrepresented students in higher ed, we are talking about Black and Latino students. We are talking about first generation of college students and students from low income backgrounds, who don't have the luxury to take that gap year. And so those are, I think, some of the ways in which we're, again, seeing sort of our members pivot as well. You were talking about students who stop out. And really what we're seeing is that continuous outreach, I think, as Erika mentioned, is just because they didn't enroll doesn't mean they're no longer, wrapped by the program that they were in terms of, checking in on them. When are you looking to enroll? What might you need? We know that right now there's a big need for a lot of basic needs to be met first before students are even considering what college looks like. But yeah, I think we really got to change the narrative about what that gap year means and what it looks like for our students.
No doubt. And one of the things that we encountered in our organization as we checked in with families that we work with is people who were needing to do additional caregiving, or if there was a change in their household, even population, if they were taking in elder members of their family and having to, again, now as we're in quarantine, stay together, what's that caregiving that needed to happen? We talked a little bit about folks with small children and the impact that also made on them sometimes. And again, a gap year is just a break. And you're right, it's more of the stop out, not necessarily the chance to expand your horizons, but the actual, the need to attend to additional, requirements on your time and your resources in order to be able to continue to move forward. Which actually brings us into a little bit more of a refinement out of curiosity as we're looking at these different drops. As far as the first time freshmen, the very first time coming in with those drops between our Black, Hispanic, and our Native American students, what are the specific things that you're hearing from Erika, for example, from the students or families that you serve?
Well, first off, I'd like to start with one of the most concerning issues that we have would be the silence that we've heard from some of our students. They've been on and off with us. And because of everything that's going on in their lives because of the pandemic, the other things that we've heard from students are a lot of barriers that they're facing in terms of like their Wi-Fi being unstable, unreliable, the FAFSA application kicking them off and making them sign back in again, IRS data retrieval tool not working, or they've been unable to locate their tax returns. So there's just many barriers in their way of completing the FAFSA.
Finding those documents is, very difficult in normal times. And to even knowing, if you need to make a request or if you have to reach out to any of the agencies, understanding how far they were behind even in responding, again, creates a whole another layer of uncertainty. Zenia, what are you hearing from your member organizations?
Yeah, so I think a couple of things that I did want to highlight in this conversation are, in the ways in which our members are responding. And so there's three things that really we're seeing being able to make a difference in. So we're seeing at the state level, some, state level and district level campaigns. For example, Michigan and Florida have both instituted state level campaigns where they are engaging, all of the high schools in their districts and in their states to, sort of do some competitive, completion of the FAFSA, for example. And so these initiatives are being led by some of our state network members, Florida College Access Network and Michigan College Access Network, for example. The second thing, I think that what they're doing is utilizing student level data. So at the moment as it stands, a few years ago, states have the ability to share student level data, usually housed within like their higher ed commissions or what have you, those state agencies, to share, again, that student level data with districts. And so districts can then actually see which students have not yet completed a FAFSA. And so that outreach, as Erika was talking about, students who are within their reach, they can really target that. It's not just mass messaging of, here's that link and complete the form, or, do this now. It really is very targeted to students who haven't yet done it, and, being able to discover, is there something going on? Are you really not considering college, or what's happening, to really do that specific outreach. And then the third thing I had mentioned earlier was that our members are pivoting in terms of their services and their programs. And so we spent all summer, last summer, really interviewing some of our members and elevating their voices about how they were ensuring that students are completing a FAFSA. A couple of things that we saw, some really innovative approaches, they actually took the lead from COVID-19 testing being done as drive-thrus. And so we saw Arizona and Mississippi take on FAFSA drive-ins. And so doing that approach where a family could come up in a vehicle, they can be passed a tablet. All, COVID-19 restrictions were in place, of course, in terms of distance and safety and cleanliness. And then they were projecting that FAFSA onto a larger screen that an advisor can then look at and guide that student. And so we saw some really, really innovative ways in which students were being reached and families were being reached to complete that FAFSA.
That is super creative and how inspiring too. I mean, is this something then, there were a couple things as I'm listening to kind of statewide data. Was there, what efforts were out there to share what each state was learning so that could continue on or be expanded? And did you, I love that idea of here, drive through FAFSA application. We're going to get that done. And just thinking about that coming through is a pretty fun thing. And that's a much more fun thing to do. Well, fun, I guess, is, interpreted that I would say than doing, a drive-through for any other number of services. But so did you see, proliferation of examples or models of people or states or necessarily sharing information or trying? So that's exactly what we did was capture, their strategies. We actually did an entire blog series on FAFSA bright spots is what we called it. And so if you go to ncan.org and do a search for FAFSA bright spots, you'll see several at state level. Hawaii, Michigan, Iowa, tons of folks throughout the country that were really pivoting services. Some went to just old school, like I'm going to pick up the phone and call students and ask what's going on and what they need and how can we help them, right? And then some, again, were really innovative in doing something like that drive-in, doing things like live FAFSA virtual events that were happening in Broward County in Florida, out of the Miami-Dade area. So we have all of those documented and happy to maybe throw in the link in the comments here for folks to take a look at those blogs and read all about what our members were doing. Great. Thank you. That would be much appreciated and a lot of fun. And so Stacey, again, thinking about those first time students coming into school for the first time, how did your organizations deal with that significant drop and how are they looking at that?
Yeah, so I think, we came together as an organization back in December to talk about a couple of things with the chief admissions officers at our campus. And one was who's in the application pool. What are we seeing in the application pool? And at that point, there were some real declines, and there still are. They aren't as significant for many of our members, but we are showing some real declines in African American, Latino, and even limited income and first generation students. We were also seeing the big drop in FAFSA completion. And so we kind of brainstormed some ideas and some programming that we should be doing to help that. We had already done for the first time a FAFSA completion webinar with some of our member schools, financial aid officers, and we also did that in Spanish as well. So we took kind of those resources that we had and tried to do more resources around just affordability, around how to complete the FAFSA, and really let our community-based organizations that we partner with, as well as our members, know that they were available, so we didn't all have to recreate the wheel, and how to reach out. And then even last night, we did a program for seniors in high school, which is kind of uncommon in March for an organization to be talking to seniors really about it's not too late to apply for college. We surveyed all of our members. As mentioned, there's about 150 of us. 84 are still taking applications for first year students. And we really wanted to send the message that if you haven't applied for college yet, it's not too late. And it's not too late to get financial aid. It's not too late to get grants and scholarships and really have the full college experience. So, we did have a number of our members on last night for a webinar, really speaking to students, families, student supporters about letting them know college is an option this year.
Wow, that is more than half of your institutions are still open. So that is a big message. And again, helping to really make sure that aid is still available. And how do you get there? How are you seeing the responses and the reaching and the campaign as far as making sure people know? Is there a good response to that?
I think so. I mean, one of the things that we wanted to make sure and do is, since we collected this information, is to get that out. And so we'll certainly, now that we have it, we're putting it out on social media. We're putting it out on our website so people can see and say, well, I didn't realize that this many schools were still open to taking applications. I think that what we've really seen from our members this year is expanding their admissions deadline, expanding if they have priority FAFSA and how they do financial aid, really listening to our partners in the high schools and with community-based organizations about what we need to do in higher ed to listen and respond.
Well, this has been such an interesting collection of ways to respond and some different things that are going on. One of our folks in our audience has asked, and I'm just going to throw it open for a grab bag because there's been some great examples about things that are working well. You've talked about creative ways that people are adapting and additional resources. Is there anything else that you might have seen in the community or you've seen out there that you've seen working well or would recommend people check out?
I would say the community events was similar to what Zenia mentioned before. What we have done is we've done First Fridays, where students and their families can stop by and they can grab some free food, say hi to us, and check in. And that's really where we can, talk to them, see how they're doing, and give them any information and talk about anything that's upcoming on the horizon, like FAFSA deadlines, college application deadlines, answer any questions that they have. So that's been very helpful.
Great, thank you.
I think, on our end, one thing that we saw is, a lot of our member programs were traditionally either, serving students through a center-based program right after school, or housed maybe within a school where they were, getting a chance to see students kind of during the school day. Now that this school day has been virtual, and having limited access to students, one of the pivots that we've seen is in where our member programs really started hosting these events during like evening hours or weekends. I don't think that's out of the box in that, we know lots of programs do Saturday programming, things like that, but it's been a very consistent outreach, in being able to host, live FAFSA virtual events in the evening hours, where we know students are, doing the virtual school during the day, or maybe are working, parents are working, those kinds of things. So I think, again, those are some ways in which we've seen programs really meet students where they are.
Zenia, you brought up a good point. I forgot to mention that we also have done that as well. We want to include the parents as much as we can. And so we've been able to work with them, at night, like at 7:00, if they're, they're off of work, we're able to meet with the parent and the student. We've even had, some meetings on Saturdays. We have one-on-one appointments with students and their families over Zoom, can answer any FAFSA questions that they have, just to, clear up any misconceptions that they have, so the family's able to do the FAFSA. We've met with students in groups online. So the pandemic has actually helped us reach, I would say, more families and, step up the parent engagement.
Right. Thank you. So I'm going to go back to kind of more of a broader question. And as much as this has been a bellwether or an indicator of potential future performance, I'm curious, what does, coming out of an unusual year and the first year of the pandemic, and now we're looking at year 2, and when does recovery start, and what kind of changes are we looking at over long term? What are some of the implications that you see of this initial, this first collection of decline? What are some of the trajectories that you see in the long-term implications from this FAFSA decline? And why don't we start with Stacey?
Well, I think, what you've seen is more of the haves and the have-nots. So you're looking and you're seeing that applications for many places are up. And, I think that's more about students applying to more colleges. And it isn't necessarily the students that are underrepresented in higher education. So even though you've seen some stories about certain institutions maybe up with first generation or students of color, overall, we're not seeing where we aren't where we'd like to be at all with those with applicants and people considering going on to higher education. I think that for a long time, and especially this year, and I think that everyone pivoted this year, but we've been reactionary. And, my hope as we move into this new year and we've seen what's happened, and hopefully with the vaccine coming out, it'll be an opportunity for us to take what we've learned from this. And I think, when Zenia talks about bright spots and things we've learned, what can we continue and how can we start being more proactive? So it's not, March of a student's senior year and we're thinking about how to get them in college. And one of the things that we've really been focusing on at the Coalition with our member schools is, what do we need to do for 9th and 10th graders? How can we start partnering with Title I schools, with community-based organizations, and to get students the information that they need to be ready for college? And I'm not talking about what coursework they need or test prep, but, are we teaching students how to advocate for themselves? Are we giving students information to understand a net price calculator and know what an affordable education is? Are we teaching students that mental health is important? You got to take care of yourself in order to be ready to go to college when you're, a senior in high school. So if you go back and you look at our website now, we've got some great resources for students, but it's not about necessarily test prep and, which courses to take. I mean, sure, that's there, but so is all this other information that's really going to make a difference, hopefully, and students really thinking that college is for them.
I find it really interesting that you made the specific point of, we were reactionary, and are we making the transition now to planning? And you're already talking about earlier discussions and really starting with 10th and 9th grade. What's not too late, moving from it is too late to it's really not too late to actually let's start planning before. So those are some interesting, again, kind of convergences. Erika, what do you see as far as being some long-term implications and how things might change?
Definitely some long-term implications would be that, enrollment is going to be down. We're going to have students who are, going to be experiencing summer melt. They're going to plan to go somewhere. And then because they haven't done financial aid, they get the the bill and they freak out and they won't be able to pay it. So they just don't go. We're going to have more students who are in college stopping out because they have to work to support their family. And we also are going to have a lower rate of students transferring from community college to four-year schools because they're going to have to take fewer classes. If they haven't done their, financial aid or aren't able to pay for it, they're going to take fewer classes. It's going to take them longer to be ready to transfer. And even those students who are transfer ready right now, they might enter the workforce in order to support their families instead of, paying for their college education.
Mm-hmm. Those long-term entry points. You bet. What about you, Zenia? What do you see as far as long-term implications or changes?
Yeah, so I think we're unfortunately going to be doing a lot of catch up, and sort of this has set us back significantly in lots of ways, from FAFSA completion to enrollment, let alone let's talk about some of the bigger issues on, verification, who actually has access to, talk about testing and, there's so many elements here. That we could dig into that I think really what this is forcing us to do is really take a look and, as Stacey said, really plan forward. What have we learned about what we can do well in some of these areas? NCAN hosted recently a conversation with CEO with the College Board and ACT CEOs, David Coleman and Janet Goodwin, and it was an interesting conversation because, here we are talking about unpacking test equity. And what does that really mean? I mean, are we talking about getting rid of these tests? Are we talking about making these tests less racially biased? Are we, and who's willing to sort of give, right? So by no means are we going to fix this today, and definitely not fix from what we've learned in this past year. But I think it's really an opportunity to really take a step back and say, where were we really making an impact? And I really like what Stacey said about partnerships, right? So how is higher ed really truly partnering with their local high schools, to really develop what that pipeline looks like. How are 2-year colleges and 4-year colleges working together to really make transferring, a smooth and seamless process, and not give students the runaround who are on, Pell dollars and just wasted 6 credits worth because they didn't transfer over for their major and what have you. And so I think there's space and opportunity here to really assess a lot of what that looks like and really rebuild it. Because I don't think we want to go back to where we were before. By any means, I think we really have an opportunity to rebuild differently, to look at students holistically, and think about, somebody made a comment here about, advocacy skills and social emotional learning. And absolutely, all of those things need to come together in order to make sure that students really are succeeding in higher ed.
And you've brought up such an interesting point. I mean, as we go through this, what you talked about is unpacking bias in testing. And I was just reflecting, I was in a conversation with one of our major supporters today, who was talking about the fact that he had just encountered with the removal of the ACT and the SAT as requirements, that what we were seeing in Black and Hispanic communities was that they were instead, what had been thought would happen was that more kind of broad educational institutions would be applied to, but they're seeing an unusual concentration into what he referred to as the elite colleges, or the very restrictive colleges. And I thought that was interesting. And what does that say? I mean, it is not just testing equity. There's perception in all kinds of things. And I think the pandemic has done an interesting job of really bringing some of these things to light. And now we have a very kind of shifting priority list of all of the things that need to be restructured and reexamined and then moved so that we can really move towards that equity stance. But you have brought up such interesting pieces, which brings me to a comment that we have from Charles Desmond, who has asked kind of a similar question. He's asked, we've attributed so much of the decline in FAFSA completions primarily to COVID-related issues. And do you think the problem could possibly be larger? I'd say, just from our conversation right now, I'm like, yes, we are moving in that direction. And then, but he's refining that. Do you think that low income and minority students are now turning away from higher education as a viable option for them? And if that's the case, what steps do you suggest we should undertake to reverse this trend?
I would say yes, it is definitely part of a larger issue. I would say it's definitely part of just a cultural issue. Minority students, and I can, speak for myself and the students that I've worked with, they are primarily a person that's part of their family. They do everything as a family. So if, the family is struggling, the student has to, kind of stop what they're doing and, start working and help out the family. Whereas, in other cultures, you don't have to do that. Usually the family's providing for you. Students are just looked at as, their main goal is to, go to school and finish. So, I can say definitely immigrant families, the student is looked at as someone who's going to help support the household. So that's, part of the bigger issue. And then the way we can combat that is, work with the family and kind of get them to see the investment that they're making. That by a student taking time and stop, either lowering their hours or stop working, that they are kind of raising their potential there for a salary, that it's going to go up. So even though they're not going to get the return on investment right now, that it's something that's going to come in the future, and it's definitely worthwhile.
I think one of the things that we've been talking about with our member schools and, really reflecting on, things that Erika said, but things that other community-based organizations have showed, and even our own members who've gone to four-year schools. If you are a Hispanic student or an African-American student and you're going to a predominantly white campus, it's time that we have some really open conversations to talk about what that's going to be like for students. And I think many times we've shied away from that in higher ed because we think it might be discouraging. We don't want to discourage students from attending our campus. And I think we need to balance about how to be honest and transparent, and then let them know some of the things that they may experience, even if we aren't happy that those are some of the things they're going to experience on our campuses, and we should do what we need to do to make them better, but also make sure that we're connecting students right away with resources that can help them be successful. So I think it's just time for us to talk openly about what it's like to experience higher ed in our country. And then I think we'll be able to change it. But until we have those open conversations, and I think a lot of campuses are, but we need to have them with our incoming students as well.
I would agree completely with everything my colleagues have said here. One thing that I'll note is we're talking about a system that wasn't built for the students who we're talking about. Higher education was not built for somebody who looks like me or who comes from the same background as I do. I grew up in a border town in Texas, low income with very limited resources to a whole lot of everything, right? And so the university was not intended for me. And so when we're talking about, is this a larger issue? Absolutely. It is a huge issue. Both my husband and I are in education in some way, and we're always having this conversation, like, how do you fix education? It's like, whoa, you got to start way back, but to that, I'll say one of the things that I think NCAN does well, and I invite, our members and others, in the field to really think about what does our place in policy look like, right? Because that's really where we also need to make changes. I mean, we can play in the field and help students navigate that existing field, or we can really change the field, right? And so when we're talking about what kinds of policies and practices need to be happening, simplified FAFSA was a good step in the right direction. That's going to come in a couple of years in terms of, when that's actually going to be implemented, and we'll see, right? I mean, I hate to say it that way, but it's like, okay, FSA, we'll see, let's make this happen. I mean, NCAN has been fighting for a really long time to simplify the FAFSA, and thanks to lots of folks on the Hill who were advocating for this, and Senator Alexander, who really pushed this forward to move towards a simplified FAFSA. But there's so many more things to fix. We're currently now tackling doubling the Pell Grant amount. When you look at what that Pell Award amount is, that doesn't do anything for a 4-year institution where students are being charged it's a ridiculous amount of money. So I don't know, I know that was a whole lot, but I'm really passionate about, there's just so much work to do, and it is not time to, rest or put the work down. We've really got to keep going. We've got to keep beating the drum on the difference that a degree can make. A degree changed my entire trajectory and has broken the poverty cycle that could have very easily existed in my own life. And so I'm a huge advocate of what, a degree can do for students and families.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Zenia. I mean, and you brought up a good point. You talked about, where are the inflection points that can make a difference? All of us work with individuals, we work with institutions, we work with collectives. But then again, that inflection point on policy and changing that, I mean, there's also many paths to that. One of them is by volume of giving agency and economic voice to a large number of people, or as many people as we can, so that voice can be raised in unison. How are some of the different ways, where do you see inflection points, again, from each different perspective, that you can be perhaps most effective as we are moving into our post-COVID world? I'm almost like it's our post-apocalyptic world, but, I'll take my Mad Max tendency over somewhere else. But, truly, and again, from the different perspectives of how we work with and how we're using those different inflection points. Maybe, Stacey, might I start with you again from an institutional standpoint? How do you see the most effective inflection points, both either from policy or from individuals or from community voice, that you might see as making the biggest change in the shortest amount of time?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest changes that we saw in higher ed that happened this year was test optional. That's usually a decision that campuses will spend 3 years thinking about, should we go test optional? How should we think about it? And I think that for the first time, campuses started thinking about how they needed to do admissions differently. I think testing is kind of a first step of thinking if that's what's good or what's not good about it, and how do we make it more fair and equitable and not use it as a barrier to get into schools. I think those conversations are now getting broader, and I think that's the right thing to do about what's really important for college success, and really what proves what a student's going to be successful in college. I mean, I think we've always talked about, their test scores, their grades, and their rigor. And I think that what we've learned is there's other things that can predict success just as well. And, part of that is resilience. What are they doing this time? How have they really shown up that they can succeed in whatever environment that we put students in? So I think this is a great opportunity for us to think about the admissions process in higher education and what's the most fair and equitable way to move forward with that. And so I think that's certainly one of the things that we're thinking about as a coalition. And the other thing that's just been valuable to me as someone who's been in enrollment management is really listening when we, redid our application last year, and we'll do it this year, is how valuable it was for us to hear from community-based organizations, and just not high schools, but community-based organizations, about how we should be wording things and how we should be asking questions. So I think these kind of continued questions about eliminating that access to some really great colleges that fully fund their students, I'm hoping can start making a small difference in how students think about higher education.
Thank you. And you made a great example. And when you talked about the change in testing, your example is, we usually think about this for 3 years, and it's a long, thoughtful process. And then we might come up with a decision and we'll test it. But, bam, this year made a decision, didn't take 3 years, off we went. And then talking about, I'm kind of curious, you're using specific words, you're talking about resilience. And I would say 2020 is certainly, a test year for resilience. And just thinking about that application process and essays and things that maybe go, but that might be an interesting component. How did you get through 2020, and what is your resilient story? Coming from that, what an interesting idea. Erika, tell me a little bit about, from your perspective, what do you see those points of inflection and how we might affect a greater change?
Yeah, I would definitely agree with my colleague. We can definitely affect change in the higher ed institutions. Some things that I've seen is they have increased access for certain things. Something as small as, allowing a student to turn in forms electronically versus, turning in a physical copy can be huge for a student. There are some students who, don't have access to a printer. And now that, COVID has kind of shut down I know some of our schools are shut down where students can't, even go on campus. So they don't have access to a printer. So just by allowing them to submit something electronically, that is huge for them. Another thing that I've seen is colleges have really thought about how they can make their services more accessible. So at our partner school in Mass Bay Community College, what they have done is they've created a virtual Q&A center where a student can go and have their questions answered by financial aid, student accounts, registrar's office, IT. It's a one-stop shop for a student to have any of their issues solved. And so that really makes things so much better because we're not having students, being bounced around between different departments or, walking around with an issue unresolved because they didn't know who to contact or how to contact them, or they missed an email, or they got an email and they didn't understand what it meant. So something as, simple as a Q&A center where a student can drop in and have their question answered is a great thing.
So it sounds like from your perspective, streamlining and taking away some of that friction and making things, again, accessible in multiple different ways. And how do we think of accessibility? Is one of those major inflection points that can, again, at volume or at mass or really, really help us move forward much more quickly. Thank you. And so, Zenia, tell me from your perspective you started with the perspective on the inflection point. So talk to me a little bit about some of the policy things that you see making a difference, and how do you see community support for that being important?
Sure. So I first really appreciate the fact that Stacey is here, representing the coalition, in that, I do think that there are some real serious admissions policies that need to change. I mean, obviously we are friends at, NASFA on the financial aid side, and our friends at NACAC on the admissions and advising side, have their hands in all of this. And so I think that institutions can really play a critical role in that. Because like you said, how ironic, you could go test optional within, a couple months notice, and here we are. And on the test optional policy, really quick, I'll go on my soapbox here. Is test optional really optional? When we see our, again, students from low income backgrounds or students of color who, don't have access to taking a test and, are applying to a school that is now test optional, while their, wealthier, likely white peers are crossing, state lines to go take a test and have the access to those resources, to be able to do that and continue test prep and those kinds of things. And so really, I think pushing for a test blind policy is really where it would make the difference. I think we'll see on what actual admissions decisions look like, in regards to that policy. We know application numbers have been up, and that's great. That more students of color are applying to more prestigious schools that they perhaps weren't before, because that the testing requirements is what was keeping them away. As a barrier, but we'll also see on that. I think a couple other things on the partnerships piece. Erika talked, as you said, about streamlining, and I think really, again, beating the drum on kind of partnerships and how are people working together within these educational ecosystems. We're looking to learn from high schools and from K-12 about some of the maybe partnerships that they have with their local institutions around automatic admissions policies or anything like that, or specific dollars that are attributed to students within the community. And so that leads to my third point about affordability. I mean, we've got to make this thing affordable for our young people, and it's just not. It's just not. And I don't know how much more clearly to say that. And so we've got a lot of work to do, again, both in terms of just advocating for policy changes. Stacey, appreciated that you said that institutions are looking to learn from community-based organizations, from high schools about, how they're talking to students, what they're talking to students about, and what students are asking, right, and what they're needing. And what they're needing is that continued support too, because great, if we solve this issue on access, right, we've been increasing, enrollment numbers, with the exception of this past year, of course, with the pandemic. But, more Black and Latino students were enrolling in post-secondary ed. But then we're looking at retention and completion, and those numbers are still, not where they need to be, where they should be. And so we really need to look at what kind of supports are in place once a student enrolls in a campus. And so what are institutions doing in those ways to provide those support services for students, again, around mental health, around adjusting to, to a place that wasn't meant for them, that wasn't built for them. And so, I remember my own experience going to a predominantly white institution, and it was like, whoa. I mean, left and right, I can, I have a list of things that I didn't know how to do, what to do, how to address, how to ask for help. Everything from that resiliency factor to some really common sense kind of stuff that, because no one in my family had ever been to college, they couldn't tell me what to expect when living in a dorm. And so we have to talk about all of those kinds of things that our students are in need and figure out how to address them and who's responsible for addressing them.
And that's a great way to put it in that question. So, I wanted to ask a final question in thinking about all of the things that are facing us today. From all of you, as a community or as individuals, what is your call to action? How can we get involved? What do we need to know as individuals and as a community to help and positively impact this application and enrollment completion issue that we're looking at here today? How can we do this? What do we need to do?
I think I'll start. I can start. I would say we definitely have to keep advocating for our students, taking all of their, concerns, issues, questions, and bringing them forward and having those impact change. The CPC, the College Planning Center, we're part of NCAN, and we're also an NCAN fellow. So we're part of the NCAN fellowship. And we're advocating with Congress for double Pell, for more college affordability. And so we just need to keep having these conversations, with Congress to affect change on a big scale, but also with the institutions so that, like my colleague said, students can see that they can, transfer and not lose their credits and, receive an affordable education.
I think we need to have more drive-thrus. That's one of the things I think we can do. As an individual, I can pull a tent together and we can organize a volunteer group to start to bring those together. I love that idea. I just think that's fantastic. Stacey, what would you ask our community members or our community in general to take action on and to really address this issue?
Yeah, I think from the higher ed side, I think that we have to do more than say, well, of course, if someone asks, if someone calls, we'll take a late application or we'll do this. I think we need to start thinking about removing barriers. And so, extending deadlines or changing admissions policies. I also think that it's important, especially for those of us who have said, or obviously still kind of sit at the table in those conversations at your campus. You have to be the person who's constantly bringing up the importance of access. I know, different presidents have different missions and different boards have different missions, but one of the things that we talk a lot about is how do we empower our, member organizations, enrollment leaders to be that power, that access voice at their campus, to remind administrators, to remind boards, to remind faculty members the importance of being accessible to students at your campus. And that's just not in your admissions policy, which is important, but it's so critically important in order for how you aid students and making sure that they have the resources once they're there to continue, because there is a gap problem for students who are Pell, who are entering, or underrepresented, who are entering compared to, middle income in the white population. So I think we have some more work to do. Higher ed can learn so much from our partners at community-based organizations in high schools. And I have been so inspired by seeing all of us work together even more this year and learning from one another and making those commitments to lift students up. So I really hope and I feel confident that will continue in the future.
Thank you. And Zenia, what is your call to action? What would you ask your neighbor to do today?
So I would say if you are in the college attainment space in terms of from an organization or a high school or program, to first sign our open letter to members of Congress at the moment to support doubling the Pell. I think that's one of the best things that can be done. Do that by tomorrow. But really, we are looking for support to, again, really elevate this as a policy need to double the Pell amount. I think, again, trying to address the affordability issue for us is key. Now that we've, managed to get the FAFSA simplified a bit. It was a long, lengthy form that was just a barrier in itself. So again, we'll see what that looks like in the years to come as that plays out. But again, it doesn't mean anything. We still can't afford college. So I would say that I would encourage anybody who's not engaged with NCAN to consider taking a look at our website, looking at our resources. Use data is the other thing I would say. If you're your counselor and advisor at a school and you're sitting here saying you have no idea what your numbers are in terms of FAFSA completion, NCAN has a free public tool that is available. You can also go to the Federal Student Aid website and find the raw data there as well, because we do take the government raw data and I've plugged it into some really great charts on formyourfuture.org, where you can look up your FAFSA data. Again, it's not student level data, but you can look at it by district, by city, by school, to see what those numbers look like. And then you've got to really think about, again, who your partners are, who are the people at the table or that need to be at the table to really have this conversation and say, look, I'm in X city and these numbers are down the drain and they are 20% down compared to this time last year. And we've got to do something about it because this is unacceptable. And so really elevating that in a way that is holding, your entity accountable in your community, I think is really key to try to be able to make some strides in your community.
Thank you. Making strides is what we really, really are dedicated to doing. And I thank you, all of the warriors that have joined us here today. For really bringing some light to this particular issue and how we might really, interpret it, what we see coming into the future, what does this mean, and how we are both currently addressing it and some of the possibilities for making a larger difference in many different ways. And so thank you. I want for everybody to join us today. And thank you if you've been joining us, whether you're live or you're catching us on the replay. As you can see, the early warning signings are very concerning and a situation that we need to work together towards solution proactively. We also must continue to empower our students and families by giving them the information that they need to complete college applications and the FAFSA enrollment process. Don't forget, again, while Inversant is delighted to invite you to join our beta launch of our new FAFSA addition to our financial aid course, I'm thinking that we need to maybe think about turning that into a drive-through. Right now, it's a virtual drive-through. So come check us out at my.inversant.org and sign up for free. And if you haven't already, make sure to connect with our guests here today. So Zenia, share with us how we can best find and connect with you.
Sure. Email is the best option. So hendersonz@ncan.org, hendersonz@ncan.org. And I'm on Twitter as well, Zenia NCAN. But I would say email, we'd love to have folks join as members, but direct you to some of the free public resources that we have available. We've got lots of professional development opportunities available for those as well. And I definitely want to hear more about this financial aid course that you all have in store. So
great. Thank you. Happy to chat. Erika, well, how do we find you and where would we connect with you?
With me, so I would say the best way is MetroWestCPC.org. Please shoot us an email. We're on Facebook. We have, I'd say we mostly use Facebook. We have Twitter. So please, one of those, but definitely send us an email. That's the best way. And then we'll call you.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Stacey. Very much appreciate it. And I'm Heidi Hancock. I am the CEO of Inversant, and you can catch me at inversant.org. Happy to chat and connect and can't wait to meet you as well. Thank you again for joining us. Until next month, keep up that good fight for more inclusive and equitable access to higher education. Join us at inversant.org, and we'll see you soon. Thank you for joining us. Take care.